Namaskar, good afternoon, and warm greetings from Confederation of Indian Textile Industry, CITI. Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to all of you to the second edition of Global Textile Conclave on the India Factor, Transforming Global Textiles and Apparel in 2021-30, which is organized by Confederation of Indian Textile Industry, CITI, along with co-partners, International Textile Manufacturers Federation, ITMF, and International Apparel Federation, IAF, and our knowledge partner, CITI Textile Organization. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome all the eminent personalities chairing each session, esteemed moderators, panelists, media, and delegates to the second day of this significant virtual conference. We are extremely delighted to have participants from different parts of the world. We have received an overwhelming response of more than 4,500 registered delegates for the CITI GTC 2021. Your presence in large numbers for this e-conference signifies the strength and importance of this sector. Thank you all for joining this e-conclave and sparing the time from your busy schedule. The second edition of GTC covers the entire textile value chain from farm to fashion and is one of the major international virtual conclaves for textiles and clothing and allied industry. The Honorable Union Minister of Textiles and Women and Child Development, Srimati Smriti Subin Irani ji, yesterday inaugurated CITI Global Textile Conclave 2021. We were also privileged to get goodwill message from Honorable Prime Minister of India, Sri Narendra Modi ji, which was read by Honorable Union Minister of Textiles. CITI GTC 2021 portrays the advantage India and enhance the global visibility from the Indian textile industry players to attain international standards. We have several eminent and renowned speakers of international stature who would be brainstorming on the emerging opportunities and challenges in the global textile trade. They would be also exploring India as one of the largest sourcing hubs for the international brands in the coming decades. Yesterday, CITI GTC 2021 covered 3 sessions other than inaugural session. Session 1, Apparel Sourcing Trends in the New Normal. Session 2, Attracting FDI in Apparel Manufacturing in South Asia. Session 3, Advanced Textiles, Building Blocks for Creating a Technical Textile Ecosystem. Today, we are covering 6 more sessions. That is, Session 4, Addressing Climate Change in the Fashion Industry. Session 5, Digitalization in Textile Manufacturing. 6, Impact of Emerging Trade Alignments. 7, Global Fiber Situation. 8, New Business Models in the Textiles and Fashion Industry. And last, 9th, Sourcing Trends in Home Textiles Advantage India. Let me also take this opportunity to extend our sincere gratitude to all our co-partners, ITMF and IAF, knowledge partner, CITI Textile Organization, sponsors, exhibitors, advertisers, authors who have contributed for the special edition of Textile Times, for supporting us for this e-conference and making CITI GTC 2021 a grand success. Thank you. Now let us start the proceedings. Ladies and gentlemen, the third session of GTC 2021 is on addressing climate change in the fashion industry, which will be moderated by Ms. Priyanka Khanna, International Expansion Manager, South Asia, Fashion for Good, and our panelists for this session are Mr. Bob Assenberg, Fund Director, Good Fashion Fund, Ms. Karla Magruder, President Accelerating Circularity and CEO of Fabrikology, Ms. Mridula Ramesh, Founder, Sundaram Climate Institute, Ms. Pernilla Halldin, Public Affairs and Engagement, H&M Group. On behalf of CITI, I would like to invite Ms. Priyanka Khanna for moderating the session and all our panelists for sharing their valuable thoughts and possible solutions in addressing climate change in the fashion industry. Over to Ms. Priyanka Khanna. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Priyanka from Fashion for Good, an organization that's leading the transition of the fashion industry to a more circular or a sustainable one through the medium of innovation. When I thought of how I wanted to start the session, I wanted to start with a couple of facts and statistics about the industry. And then when I started putting it together, I realized the picture looks pretty grim. So I thought of pulling out a few positive facts or not really facts, but a few positive notes to start the session and put it on a more positive side. Hundreds of brands and supply chain players have made commitments towards sustainability in their businesses. In fact, sustainability is becoming a defining factor in the long-term goals and is primarily driven by the climate change awareness. Thousands of startups or innovators, as we call them, have come up with solutions to afford the toxic and linear processes in the fashion industry. All of the solutions that we see are potentially the future of this industry. Hundreds of initiatives and organizations like Fashion for Good, Accelerating Circularity, UNFCCC, have come up in the last decade that are supporting the industry to make the change. On that note, please join me in welcoming our wonderful panelists. They've already been introduced, so I'm just going to call them out quickly. Pernilla from H&M Group, but also the co-chair of the policy group of UNFCCC Charter. Karla, who's the president of Accelerating Circularity, and the CEO of Fabrikology. We're also joined by Ms. Mridula, who's the founder of Sundaram Climate Institute, but also is a fantastic author of The Climate Solution, a book targeted to India. And then last but not the least, we have Bob, who's the fund director for Good Fashion Fund, a very uniquely positioned fund to support manufacturers. Welcome, everyone. Without further ado, let's get this conversation started. A quick note to all the audience. Please keep putting your questions in chat. Time permitting, we'd like to pick up a few questions towards the end. Wonderful. So, Pernilla, I'd like to start with you. Do I have you on call? Pernilla, I'd like to start with you. The Fashion Charter, you're the co-chair of the policy group of the Fashion Charter. The Fashion Charter's main vision is to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. There are also a couple of interim goals, which feel really daunting because it's such a huge, big, daunting task to take on. Between 2018 to now, since when the Fashion Charter started, what are the main actions that have taken place? And a continuation of this question would be, in your opinion, are we on the right trajectory to meet those 2050 targets?
Thank you. Thank you for that. So today, yes, I'm wearing a bit two hats. I'm wearing the H&M Group hat and I'm wearing the co-chair hat. And I can just start with, from the H&M Group perspective, we set already 2017 or earlier the goal of being climate positive 2040. And at that time, and still, we don't know perfectly how to get there, but we know that if we don't set that target, we're not going to get there. And that's one of the, I mean, it's about focusing on energy efficiency. It's about moving over to renewable energy in our whole value chain. And it is about using the carbon sinks. And here, one important tool is also the circular, because we cannot go to climate positive if we don't go circular. So that is really our vision, to become 100% circular. And to complete your question, one of the pillars here is really to move the industry. And we have seen that the Fashion Charter within UNFCCC is one of those initiatives where we put a lot of efforts in, because it's not only about us as one company. We're all in this together. And also, we see that 70% of the emissions are in the production. And it is in production where we share suppliers. So the Fashion Charter is therefore of great importance to us. And I'd say that the Fashion Charter, we've had 2 years to come together and to create actions. So what we have done is really establishing a way of working where we focus on manufacturers, and we also focus on our own companies and on policy. And I'm co-chairing the policy group, which is really to make sure that we don't have regulations that are hindering us to transform into renewable energy, which we do today in many of the markets. There are regulations that are hindering us. And I think that is one important thing, because we can push as much as one company or push together, but if there are regulations that are hindering us, we're not going to get there, right? So that is extremely important. So I would say during these 2 years, there has been quite a lot happening, and mainly in the real structure to really set the goals, to come together, to know what we're doing, but there is not enough actions. So we need much more. And that is really, you're pointing out what will come next. Well, we really need to take big actions, big steps. We want more manufacturers on board here to share the responsibility with us, to really move this forward. So I'd say we have done a lot. We have not done enough. Still a long way to go. And there is an urgent need for actions on all the different levels. Everything from one supplier or factory turning into solar, having solar panels or whatever solution is the best for that, to on a holistic level, work on the regulations to level the playing field and make the production countries really move towards renewable energy. I think, just as a last sentence here, I think that it's so important. The reason why I'm pushing for the production is because we know 70% of the emissions are there. And that's really also where the regulations are not perfectly in favor of renewable energy. And I think here we can really push for also for a level playing field. It's not only us and our industry that will benefit from it. It's the whole country. And I think it's important to understand also, for if we're going to reach our goals and all our peers will reach their goals, it's also important to think of a market as an attractive sourcing market. And an attractive sourcing market is a market where you move towards renewable energy. I'll just stop there. I can keep on going.
Thank you. I mean, there are so many points you mentioned that I would want to pick up for larger debates, and hopefully we will get time a little towards the second part of the session. But to reflect on a few things, I think you started with saying circularity is key to reduction of these emissions. 70% of the emissions, I think that's a fantastic stat to emphasize on a little more. 70% of the emissions come from the production markets, and India, and this conference is for India, and we are looking at India being one of the larger production markets. So a lot of emissions coming out of there, and then a push towards renewable energy to make the sourcing markets more attractive. So I want to first pick on the circularity part and bring Karla also into the conversation here. Karla, your organization is called Accelerating Circularity. A very specific area that contributes to the GHG emissions is the millions and tons of textile waste coming out of the production markets, but also post-consumer. Accelerating Circularity is a project that's aimed at creating solutions and infrastructure for this textile waste that can be fed back into the supply chain. And this is a specific use case of how textile industry can reduce emission. So Karla, could you talk a little bit more about Accelerating Circularity, how it's addressing this big audacious problem, and also what it means for the manufacturing markets?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Priyanka. So Accelerating Circularity is a nonprofit, what we call in the United States a 501c3. And the reason that I mention that is because all of the work we do is for the public good. And we have to have a mission. Our mission is to divert textiles from landfill and incineration, specifically for textile to textile circularity systems. We believe wholeheartedly that it has to be a system to function. And to Pernilla's point, everybody has to be involved in this. So we're a neutral body that can bring together all of the actors for the development of these systems through collaborative action, right? We need to have everybody involved, just as they're doing for policy. And we do that through working groups and product trials. what we've been doing is we've mapped where we can find all this waste, right? We need to know where it is. We need to know what's in it. And then we need to figure out what are the links that need to happen to get those materials to the right places. So we're looking at those missing links and how do we connect those links. And then once we pull all that together, which is where we are today, is to trial that system, because that system, we have to know that that system's going to work from a quality standpoint, from a logistics standpoint, economically, and most of all, environmentally. We know that there's no reason to move to the circular system unless we are making those big changes when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, if we can reduce those. So in our work, we're establishing some tools. We've come up with a textile use hierarchy that talks about where that textile waste, or we like to call it spent textiles because we don't want to treat it as waste anymore, where those textiles belong. And when we're talking about circularity in general, certainly not all of it needs to go into the recycling market. Some of it needs to go into the reuse market or repair market. So hopefully we'll understand how much gets to come to recycling, how much gets to go to those other markets, what's most appropriate for that. We've also created matrices for both mechanical and chemical recycling. And those matrices talk about what of the recyclers today, what are the fiber blends that they can use? And then also what are the restrictions that apply also to those fiber blends? Those tools are useful for the collectors and sorters so that they know what are the sortation, what are the fractions that they need to move to. And also too, when we look at the restrictions, so they need to look at what restrictions different recycling technologies have. These are going to be tools that many people in the marketplace can use, even the brands and retailers, so they know if they're designing for circularity, how to do that. So I believe that this is going to be really great for the move. The move to circularity is really going to be wonderful for the Indian markets. Today in India, they are actually ahead of many other markets in terms of currently sorting spent textiles. They do it for wool, they do it for other items as well. So they have this experience behind them. What they're going to need to know is when we have advanced recycling technologies, you know, they're going to need to make some shifts, right? So they'll shift from how they're sorting it today to find uses for it, for what these new uses will be. So I really believe that they're going to have a lot of opportunities. And there are some recyclers, advanced recycling technologies that are in the process of being developed right now in India on the ground, because obviously it's so important. So I think that there's a tremendous amount of opportunity, and I'm looking forward to seeing that commercialized at scale, which is the next most important element, because without doing it at scale, we're not going to create the business models that we need to have happen.
Thank you. So I hear you say that India is such a key market because it's manufacturing central, and this potentially recycled part of the spent textiles, as you say, is going to become the new feedstock or the new materials that the Indian manufacturers or the Indian manufacturing market would be working with. Thank you. That was pretty insightful, especially on the technology side as well. Mridula, I'd like to bring you in here and talk a little bit more about the Indian story. I think Karla finished it really well at what it means for Indian manufacturing market. Mridula, you've authored a book on India's climate change crisis. The book refers to countrywide issues, but there is also some insights and reference to textile industry. So I think I would love to hear your opinion on how should the Indian textile sector now act? Like, where should the stakeholders start today? Mridula, I know that you're on the call. Yeah, we can't hear you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, it's been wonderful listening to everyone, and thank you for having me. There are a couple of points out there, right? First, I think when we talk about climate, we need to acknowledge that India is one of the most vulnerable countries to this warming climate. And if we stop all emissions today, the climate is still going to warm because that's how climate inertia works. Right? And I heard a wonderful quote yesterday, which in another climate change session, which I'm going to share with all of you. If climate change is a shark, water is its teeth, right? And the one thing that I'm really frustrated about is in the fashion, conversations, water is completely absent. It's distinguished by its absence, right? So that needs to be part of the story, because apart from being an author and writing about climate change and all of that, I also run a spinning mill, right? And I realized that the carbon aspect of it is the easiest thing to tackle, because we have a high electricity price. We've invested in minerals. A lot of the spinning industry has gone aggressively for renewables because it makes commercial sense. Every motor of mine has a thermal signature which we track every day and reduce, improve the efficiency because it's a cost-effective thing to do. But water is completely absent in the story. And one of the reasons for that, and this actually shocked me when I looked up the number, when I looked at the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, right? And I looked at the consumer price index for apparel. I looked at 1991, which is just after climate change burst into our collective consciousness, and now 30 years later. You know how much the consumer price index of apparel has fallen by? 8% in 30 years. So of course we can get to sustainability. Of course we can get to sustainability in all ways. Fair wages, treating our environment responsibly, but I think those things take money to do. And I think the aspect of you get what you pay for, and you trace what you value are both things that the entire value chain. And when I talk about stakeholders, that's something that's absolutely missing in the picture. You get what you pay for and you trace what you value. And I think that is the missing part of the story, that water needs to be there. We need to trace, so you actually make sure that the behavior that you want to create is across the value chain, and then you actually pay for it, because you're not going to get the changes at scale that you mentioned. I'll just mention one thing more. In a private capacity, I have several investments in what I call climate resilient startups, right? Again, the same point that Karla was making earlier. One of my investments is in a waste management company who collects waste from different households, helps them sort it, and then takes them to the different end use. Post-consumer textiles are a nightmare to deal with, right? And I think, the one way to look at it is actually looking at alternative materials, which we may get into later in the thing. But I think, again, I'm reasonably confident we'll get where we want to, as long as we have the incentives aligned across the value chain. But I think that is where the conversation needs to be. The carbon is an easier part of the puzzle, because India has I'm seeing all the other people in the thing, and all the manufacturers are saying we're paying too much for our electricity, but that's a good thing. Very incentivized.
Wonderful. So what I hear you say, I think one of the debates is the bigger picture debate, which is on sustainability versus pricing. And I think there are so many different point of views with no real clear direction as to the pricing of materials constantly keeps falling, but yet the expectation is to build the sustainable practices. I absolutely agree. And I'm not sure if there is a real clear answer with anyone right now. I think this is an ongoing debate that's probably going to continue for another decade or so. But the other points you mentioned was on, first of all, kudos to the climate resilient startups. I think that a lot of us work in that space, and it's very exciting to be part of so many startups and looking at all these new climate resilient technologies. The other point you brought up was also water, as water being a bigger challenge in the Indian ecosystem, particularly. And there are a lot of technologies that are currently, a lot of the manufacturers actually currently looking to adopt. I want to bring in Bob here, especially So as someone who is constantly evaluating technologies, more advanced stage technologies through the fund, and also interacting with a lot of the supply chain players, including manufacturers like Mridula, Bob, where in your opinion is the textile industry in India? And especially with respect to achieving the sustainable production. And of course, with sustainable production, I want to catch on to Mridula's point of water, carbon, renewable energy, all of that. Could you give us a quick summary on that?
Sure, thank you, Priyanka. Now, let me firstly, for people, just give a very brief highlight of what the fund does, because I think not everyone is aware. So the Good Fashion Fund is an initiative by the Lourdes Foundation and Fashion for Good, and really focusing on 3 countries in Asia: India, Bangladesh, Vietnam, with the aim to provide access to sustainable and impactful technologies to the manufacturers in those countries. So really with the idea that we provide long-term finance to those manufacturers that have sustainability in mind and really want to improve on that level. And we're an impact fund, which means that we, of course, we want a return from our money, but at the same time, we look very closely, as we call it, on 5 goods, which are related to materials, but also water, energy, and good lives and good economy. So for ourselves, it's really important that the elements that all the speakers have been talking about actually are being implemented within those manufacturers. So we really look at those, I would say, key items for ourselves, so the 5 goods, in order to be implemented. So let me start there as a starting point. So where is India, and what is the sort of the what are the opportunities and the ways that India or the manufacturers within India are tackling carbon emissions, but also the water reduction? I think India is also, if you would compare it to other countries, neighboring countries, is doing reasonably well, but still lacking, I think, in terms of productivity, which is still also, I think, because of the sometimes even outdated equipment. I think if you look at the industry itself, it's an old fish in the industry anyway. So technology can play a really important role going forward by improving not just productivity, but also on the social and environmental, and I think on the financial side. So that goes for the industry as a whole. And if you would look at India, it might be slightly lagging behind other countries. So I think, what is the potential there? There's a huge potential. And that is firstly, and that's also what we're looking at as a fund, that's moving more towards circular business models. So also looking at technologies that can support that. But realistically speaking, also where the industry is right now, there's a lot of replacement to do as well, I would say, by equipment and technologies that are currently already in the market, but are not being implemented. And I think actually by replacing current technology by much more efficient and much more sustainable equipment can really mean a lot. And that's, for instance, also what we as a fund try to do, provide access to those manufacturers that really have a vision to become sustainable, really have the sustainability in mind, but don't have the funding to do that. Because that, I think, is also an issue, because we can talk about sustainability and implementing it, but this is a margin. It's a low margin business. In that sense, a lot of, particularly on the small and medium-sized manufacturers, they might be willing to implement it, they might be willing to replace it, they might be willing to install new measures, but don't have the funding and or don't have the local banks that really understand those technologies and can provide the long-term finance. So what we're trying to do, and I think that's also for India, that's an important thing to do, is actually to demonstrate that by implementing new technologies, you can really, and it can be more towards circularity, but it can also really be state of the art. You can really make a difference in that sense. And I think that's for India typically something that can be done. Maybe finishing, I think as a fund, when we started just over a year ago, that was still, of course, pre-COVID. We were looking at expansion. And also, I think we were looking jointly with the manufacturers and brands at expansion-related plans. Right now, a lot of that what we're seeing as well is replacement related, which makes sense because it might not be growing that fast. And I think a lot of the forward-looking manufacturers are taking also replacement of what they currently have in mind. And that I think is an important element as well, because I think sustainability is not just being sustainable. I think by replacing outdated equipment, it's also financially interesting. So those two goes hand in hand, I think. So the environmental, social, because that's important for us, and the financial benefits, they go hand in hand. And I think that's an important message. It's not just about sustainability in terms of the environment, it's also about financial sustainability and benefits from that side.
Thank you, Bob. I had a question for you later on technology, but I think since you're already here, I want to put my follow-on question right now.
Okay.
Since you mentioned about the fund and how uniquely positioned it is for manufacturers, helping them adopt these technologies, can you talk to us about some technologies that you're interested in supporting the manufacturers adopt? It could be quite useful for the supply chain players in the audience today to know how they can access the GFF investments as well.
Yeah, sure. I can give it's a long list, of course, if you're talking about replacing or having new equipment, but we're looking at the production or the manufacturing phase because there are a lot of emissions being happening, a lot of savings can be done at that level. So we see that a lot of it is what we're looking at, and we're also in discussion with the manufacturers. What it's about the dyeing, it's the printing, and the finishing. So quite a few of the technologies that we're looking at are in that area, and of course, wastewater solution is another important one, I think, for a lot of these manufacturers. So what you do see is on dyeing, you do have cold bed batch dyeing, you have CO2 dyeing. Those are the things actually that are being implemented that are already at a stage that also manufacturers can safely implement and adopt those because they have a good track record. The same goes for things actually that might not look very straightforward in that sense. That might look quite straightforward and not too sexy to call it, but like digital printing, things like that. Those are really making a difference. The same thing is with laser finishing. I think these technologies really make a difference, and they're moving. It's gradually moving towards I think a circular business model. But at this point in time, it's really making already quite a lot of difference in terms of reductions, and particularly on energy savings on that side, you can see that. Another element that we do see is effluent, for instance, treatment systems that's what you would see treatment plants basically. That is an element which is also really important. The water, that's also what we're looking at as a fund. I think water usage or treated water, that really makes a difference. The same with closed loop water systems, these kind of things. They make a difference financially and environmentally. Maybe then going back, how can they actually come to us? Because I think we're looking for manufacturers that really want to be front runners in that respect, really have sustainability in mind, and do have an investment plan. And we're typically looking at investments between $1 and $5 million dollars. So that's what it is. We provide long-term dollars. We're doing that. These amounts are quite big, but at the same time, if you want to buy this equipment, the amounts are quite high. So it's capital intensive. So that's what happens. So you should have something in mind. And what we look jointly with the manufacturer, and in cases also with brands, actually, how can we? What is the best equipment around? We work also, for instance, also with Fashion for Good and other parties to see what would be the most applicable equipment. And then we make a plan to install it. And then we really look at the benefits from a financial and environmental point of view. But we're really looking at huge impact. So the investment should have, let's say, over 50% reduction in one of those areas that we mentioned, which quite often could be the case. But it's really a step forward financially, environmentally. And if people would like to work with us, it's on our website, goodfashionfund.com. But I think that's what we're looking for. So really about the combination, and what we're trying to do is really to match in a sort of a triangle the equipment, I think, or the technologies, the manufacturers, and the brands. So we're somewhere in the middle and making it glue. That's basically what we try to do.
Thank you, Bob. I'm sure this was very useful for a lot of supply chain players in the audience. Good Fashion Fund, if anyone wants to reach out. Something that I got out of this was you picked up on a lot on sustainability and making sustainable sense, but also making financial sense. And I think this addresses a little bit of what Mridula said earlier, that sustainability initiatives make sense if there is also a financial improvement, or financially it makes sense for production or for the manufacturers as well. So with that, Bob, you sort of defined the role of technologies, And he also identifies certain technology areas that particularly are very good for the current production market that we are looking at, Indian production market. Pernilla, I want to bring you in here from the global lens, coming back to the global lens a little, and trying to define the role that policy plays. We've understood the role from Bob a little on what technologies play in the future and driving this circularity and sustainability in the industry. Pernilla, could you talk a little bit about what role, in your opinion, policy plays in pushing this forward?
I think it's a key, it's absolutely a key role, because that's how a government can facilitate the transformation. And if it's on CO2 emissions, or if it is on water, or on circular, but also I'd like to add the chemical part there. I think there are the chemical restrictions in the global are too low. And I think that has a huge effect on the water. So there is an immense opportunity when we talk about policy, because that's really how you can lead a country towards a much more sustainable. It's also a way of leveling the playing field.
So if I just dig on this a little more, from an H&M point of view, H&M has been leading the way in sustainable initiatives. There are so many newer initiatives that we hear of constantly. And from H&M's point of view, but also from large and small player point of view, are there any specific policies that enable these initiatives? I'm also looking at using this answer as a little key to the large and small supply chain players that are also on the call today, to learn to say how do they adopt, how do they use, and what role for those initiatives, where would the policies be placed, basically? Digging a little deeper into this.
Yeah, I think it's one way. One thing is, of course, for the manufacturers to really point out the importance of this. And it can be as easy as not that the government is not supporting fossil fuel, is instead leveling that, because in many countries they are still supporting the fossil, which means that the fossil fuel will be cheaper than renewable. Well, if we took away everything and made it a level playing field, the renewable would be cheaper. And so I think for manufacturing, it's really important also to raise the voice in a country and say, hey, we're a company in the country, and this is what matters to us. And so I think there are different problems in different countries here, with sometimes tax on solar panels and or whatever it can be. There are different ways. Sometimes you need to use the national electricity company, even if you have invested in your own renewable energy source, for example. So I think it's important to stand up and really say why this is so important. And it is a lot about being, attractive supplier, attractive sourcing market. But of course, the ultimate goal is to be able to be sustainable.
Absolutely. So what I hear from you is collectively, platforms like CITI or organizations like CITI could really push the policy agenda forward. Also, if individual manufacturers here are also pushing this envelope or pushing it to organizations like CITI to push this. So, all right, thank you.
I think manufacturing organizations are also key, where they come together.
Yes. Yeah, I think that was the main insight for me, that individual people can demand such things from organizations, and organizations can push this forward to governments to build those policy. I think I'd like to bring in Mridula here, sort of flip this question to you, Mridula, from an India-only point of view. And also, I know that, Mridula, you've interacted on policy, technology, new business models. And I think it'd be good to understand from your point of view, because since you're also a manufacturer, what are the key areas or key things that you're most excited by?
Okay. Okay. So to Pernilla's point, there is an obligation for each of us to push, right? So when I started talking about climate change about 8 years ago, people thought it was a crisis gone badly wrong. but people begin to take it more seriously because I think today it's impossible to ignore. From the manufacturer's point of view, many of us, we have things called dedicated feeders. So we invest in our own power, and a lot of that power tends to be renewable. And there are energy exchanges today that we buy, renewable energy from, right? So very often it's not cheaper in India to buy it. The unfortunate thing is, and here you're really getting into policy, you start saying, how like a spider's web it is. Today, many of us pay a cross-subsidy surcharge, industrial customers. And, and what I'm going to say is really unpopular now because a lot of, and it's so unpopular, I'm not even going to name it. There are certain sections of electricity users who don't pay for electricity at all. And that's subsidized by, other customers. So I think we're aligned, but speaking up against that tends to have political pushback. I mean, reform is difficult in any country. And that's the same in India, right? That's number one. What's exciting? Really, I mean, the climate change startups are like what I call my vaccination of hope. I really like them. I think they're pushing the boundaries. And honestly, this audience may not see it. Carbon is easy to do in India because it has a high price in India. It's easy to do. I went around 3 years ago saying I want a water startup and I'm happy to write a check for it. Can't find anything. Because, the absence of water in everybody's consciousness is so difficult. I have one startup which sort of addresses water. It actually is processing chemicals which are made from microbial enzymes, which replace the kind of chemicals that Pernilla was talking about. But again, those are expensive. To Bob's point, yes, I mean, I'm so glad to hear about his fund and I will sort of pass on the contact to a lot of people who I know, but that addresses the capital investment. But, many of these effluent plants, depending on the stage of treatment, running costs, so a lot of people tend to cheat because, going progressively higher on treatment has higher running costs, which are much higher than the margin that they're getting. So, Bob's fund certainly addresses one part of the picture, but to get the impact that you need a complete address, which is why I go back to, traceability, which is something I heard repeatedly yesterday. And I think that's a key thing if you want to change. And you have to pay for what you trace for, because otherwise you're not going to really care. I think you need these two pieces, and I'm actually quite hopeful that you will get the change you want to see.
Wonderful. Thank you. I hear you talk about traceability quite a lot. And that's one of the areas definitely the fashion industry needs to work on. I want to bring Karla in here to help us understand the role of conveners, not just reaching the zero emission targets. As you said, carbon is one part of it. There's also water and others that we need to look at. But how can our audience, or how do the conveners like Accelerating Circularity, even Fashion for Good and UNFCCC, Karla, how can we organizations literally help make this change happen in the industry? And how can stakeholders and the industry players present on the call today interact with or engage and contribute? Karla, are you on the call?
Sorry about that.
No.
So there are many ways for conveners to support the industry. And I think that UNFCCC, the organizers of this conference today, Fashion for Good, there are several things that have to happen. One is to create the baseline knowledge. Pernilla was saying how the UNFCCC has done a lot of work, but not enough. They've laid a lot of baseline. They've created some knowledge. They've shared that knowledge. People have come to the table. And for me, I think the most important thing that the conveners do is, yes, the initial stage is connecting the knowledge, but the second stage, and what I think is most important, is taking action. And so that action is the critical part. So what the conveners do is they bring people together, they provide them the knowledge, but then they also provide them the outline, the footprint for how to take action on the knowledge that's been developed. One of the things that we know at Accelerating Circularity is that everybody has a role to play. nobody can do this alone. It's got to be systematic. And so if it has to be systematic and nobody can do it alone, everybody's got to be willing to jump in, take action, share information that maybe they wouldn't have shared in the past. Certainly nothing that's proprietary, but still, when we put people in the room that are from diverse segments of, you know, what we think of as our supply chain today, they're often very surprised. Oh, you need that, or oh, that doesn't work. We have to get these varied players in the room and then to set up new systems. And these new systems, you know, we're talking about traceability, circularity is, you know, traceability is key. We're actually sort of standing in a circle, right? We can see lots of different players much more easily than we may have in the past. So get involved, participate. You've got to share. Don't come to these meetings and stay silent. You've got to share the information that you have. Everyone has a role. No one can go it alone. If we want to accelerate circularity, we've got to take action.
Thank you. On that note, we have very few minutes left to the call. And I just wanted to have a parting note from each of the panelists. Maybe if we can go around and have 1 minute or 30 seconds sort of quick note as a parting thought. Today, we've spoken about the role of conveners, we've spoken about the role of policy as well as technology. There is also some overarching conversation about the role of brands and manufacturers play in this entire addressing the climate change issue. So if each of you panelists can touch upon some aspect of what we've spoken about today in your parting thoughts. Karla, would you like to start?
Sure. I'll just follow up in a sense with what I said. You know, we've talked a lot about sustainability. You know, often people in the past have looked at that as the triple bottom line. I think the triple bottom line of, you know, the social, the environmental, and the economic are incredibly important, but we really need to see that as a balance. And I think in the past years, those three things haven't been in balance.
Thank you. Bob, you popped up next, so I think you should go.
Okay, fine. No, I think also picking up on Mridula's point of view, I think that it's all about what we see in sustainability. We're talking a lot about environmental sustainability, but I think social sustainability is a really important element in this as well. So I think that's one thing that particularly I think in the fashion industry that we should keep in mind in what we're trying to do. So it's a collaborative effort, and that should also be jointly with brands, as you were saying, because rightly so. I think in the end, it should be, the sustainability should be in everyone's sort of genes in that respect. Should not be just the manufacturers, should also be the brands working together on that. So I think it should be a more environmentally friendly place to work in, but it should also be a safer and healthier and a fairer place to work in. And I think that's an important element of the solution as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. Social sustainability, we didn't get a chance to pick on that, but thank you for bringing that up. Pernilla, would you want to go next?
Happy to go next. I think it is the collaboration part here is key. The fashion industry needs to change, and a big chunk of the fashion industry wants to change. And here we need to do that together with the manufacturers, our suppliers. We need to do it together with our customers, and we need to do it together with governments. So it's a big chunk of collaborations here.
Fantastic. Collaboration as a key point. Thank you. Mridula, I'll hand over to you last.
Thanks, Priyanka. Great conversations. Thank you so much. I think we're standing in a crossroads here. And I think I'm quite hopeful that we can change. I mean, not the least because I have children for whom the present is the future, right? I mean, it's really getting bad out there. But I do think you will get what you pay for, and you will trace what you value. And without doing those two things, we can go down a greenwashing rabbit hole, which is the last place. We don't have any space for that. Right? And so I would say, really, I think this is a wonderful moment, and we should move forward positively.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all the parting thoughts as well and this fantastic conversation. It was super insightful for me and also super short. I wish I could pick on details on everything that the panelists said, but maybe another time. But thank you so much. I hope it was equally useful and insightful for the audience as well. Thank you.